Hello and welcome to Realm's Edge Gaming. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the article that dropped today, which was all about Kragnos. We're going to take a look at his Warscroll, and also learn a little bit about his lore, and kind of predict what might be happening in the next book in the Broken Realms narrative series, which is going to be self-titled, I guess, Kragnos. If you've not already subscribed to the channel, if you could do so, that would be amazing. And if you could drop a like below, that would be really appreciated too. But without further ado, let's get into the article and learn a little bit about none other than Kragnos himself. So the article begins by saying, "Not since before Sigmar's reign has he walked among the mortal realms. Now he's set to return in Broken Realms." And we learn a little bit about the god of earthquakes, and there's some really nice artwork throughout the whole article, and we'll kind of be pausing on that too, and talking about what we can see. But you know what, a really striking image there of Kragnos, and I imagine this is kind of the front cover of the book, obviously without the background that we can see, which is going to be on for pre-order this Saturday. So it says, "Before the time of men, Dwarden, elves, and even greenskins, the entirety of the Gurish heartlands was ruled by many monstrous races that towered over the lesser mortals of the era. One of these tribes was the Drogruk, powerful centroid beings that, despite their great strength and capacity for war, actually and surprisingly lived in harmony with the land. Legend has it that Kragnos was born to the rulers of Dons, the central nation of the Drogruk, and while his people were content to only take what they needed to survive, I guess in kind of like a nomadic way, Kragnos wanted more. He was eventually scolded for beating his brother to a pulp over the right to court the same mare, and eventually the bad-tempered warrior struck out across Gur with only a small band of trusted companions for company." I really like that kind of the setup that they've put there with Kragnos and one of the Mega Gargants. And I have to say, guys, after looking at the Warscroll, I really fancy Kragnos' chances going toe-to-toe with the Mega Gargants, because his Warscroll is super impressive. And in a moment, we're going to be taking a bit of a dive into that, looking at some of the special abilities, you know, maybe having a prediction or two about how many points he will cost, because I don't think he will be on the cheap end of the scale. So we've got a really nice kind of thematic, setup there. Obviously in Gur, lots of bones around, and yeah, I think it's a kind of hinted to what's to come. I mean, it looks like a lot of the story is going to be centering around Gur, with Age of Sigmar 3rd edition dropping with a Stormcast and this yet to be disclosed destruction race, and also the city of Excelsis too. So we'll have to see what comes of that in the next Broken Realms book. It says, "As they grew skilled in the arts of war, the Drogruk fashioned weapons and armour from exposed streams of magma. So Kragnos dug out the heart of a supercharged geomantic nexus to create his prized dread mace. And it was around this time that he recovered the shield, Tuskbreaker, from a deep ravine, having been hurled there in fury when Gorkamorka chipped his tooth, testing the great bronze shield like a man might test a gold coin." It was actually the Uruks that first kind of cottoned on to the destructive power of Kragnos, and realised that he might be something special. It says here that Uruks of Gur began to gather around Kragnos, and they were impressed by his tales of rampant destruction. And for his part, Kragnos actually mutually respected their single-minded brutality and stubbornness. And I guess for a while there was kind of almost like a symbiotic relationship, whereby shamans were offering up the marrow of the slain monsters and hordes of priceless amber bone, which the Drogruk champion was all too happy to gorge upon. So with this kind of combined diet of realmstone and monster marrow from the beasts of Gur, he kind of started to absorb the primordial energies of Gur into him. And Kragnos actually began to exhibit abilities that were kind of far beyond the reach of the mortal warriors that you would kind of come to expect. His ascent to power was marked by the crushing of countless civilizations, And this is where we kind of learnt of his title, The End of Empires, whose arrival spelt doom for all. Again, we've got kind of a really nice thematic picture there, with where we've got Gordrak, the Fist of Gork, leading what looks to be like the alliance of the Mega Gargants up there. We've got the trolls, the Rock Troggoths, and the Dankhull Troggoth too, and we've got the Mega Gargants. And I imagine that they're marching towards the city of Excelsis. So it will be interesting to see what happens with that development, because I'll be honest, the story for kind of Gordrak seems to have gone a little bit quiet at the moment. He's mentioned in stories here and there. I think his kind of last main one was under the Deep Dark Mountain, where we learned about him getting the Mega Gargants and marching towards Excelsis, but it does seem to have gone a little bit quiet. You know, prior to us learning that we're only going to be 4 books in the Broken Realm series, I had done a short video where I kind of predicted which books I thought we would get, and Gordrak was one of them, but obviously not going to be the case. So, whereas before when Kragnos, was kind of, I guess, proving himself, the ground had always shaken at his footfalls. Now that he'd kind of ascended to something greater, it now cracked and sundered wherever he went. And at the Battle of Blood Gulch, an enormous fissure opened up and swallowed the monster-hunting Goraga barbarians whole. And this is where it kind of gave birth to the legend, the God of Earthquakes. So soon, Kragnos' gaze turned to the Draconith. These were actually once respected allies of the Drogruk. Now they were merely the latest challenge to his growing power, and there was an apocalyptic conflict that rendered both races all but extinct. Kragnos actually crushed the Drakes in their home, but little did he know this conquest would prove to be his undoing. And there is a beautiful piece of artwork here. It reminded me really very much of the Sons of Behemat battle tome, where we've got a lot of the kind of history, traditions of the faction and the race being passed down pictorially, almost like cave drawings from the past, and you've kind of got these really kind of sketchy little pictures, but it tells a story. You can see what's happening. We've got the humans there. It looks to be almost like an effigy or a kind of gate, and we've got the centroid forms of the Kragnos' brethren against the Drakes, and this is kind of what we saw, and this is what was reflected in the lore too as well. It's nice to see that obviously we can see 1, 2, 3, 4 of the Kragnos-esque creatures. So maybe in the future we'll see some more, obviously smaller than Kragnos. In the video The Realms Will Quake, he mentions that his people had all gone. There's something to say maybe in the future that they will return. And we learn a little bit more about the Drakes and Draconith, and this actually ties into one of his special abilities too. We're also going to take a look at an article that was dropped a long time ago called The Mysteries of the Mortal Realms. It's an article that I've kind of dipped into a few times, and it kind of does talk about this event, I believe. So let's carry on with our article. It says, after the battle, Kragnos looked around him to see that many of the broken bodies of his friends. In his rage, he vowed to wipe out the Draconith from history and trample every clutch of eggs that he could find. As he hunted down the last of dragonkind, the surviving Draconith princes beseeched the aid of the ancient intellect known only as Lord Croak. So this is why Croak is in the next Broken Realms. The kind of Draconith princes implored his aid, and he helped them. So he hatched a plan that saw Kragnos drawn into battle atop a great mountain, and finally the Dracothian lended its divine power and sealed the earthquake god within its granite heart. What will happen now that Kragnos has escaped his prison to roam the mortal realms once more? Well, we'll have to wait until Saturday to find out. So it mentions here about we said about the Dracothian race, the Draconith, As I mentioned to you before, there was an article 2 years ago called Mysteries of the Mortal Realms. And it was a really, really interesting article, and I think it kind of highlighted a path to some of the events that we're kind of looking at now. It says, what Sigmar isn't telling you about the mortal realms, and it seems as though a lot of it is being answered in the Broken Realms stories and the narrative arc for it. So one of the questions is, where did realm gates come from? And this mentions Dracothian. We all accept the existence of realm gates as a way to travel around, but who built them? What is their true purpose, and what are we not being told? So many of the realm gates we use depict the glories of Sigmar and his so-called ally Dracothian, see below, meaning that they must have been built recently, but by whom? And how did the God King travel to the realms in the first place? Something doesn't add up. So that's the kind of first talk of Dracothian and Sigmar. And then we've got this one. Is Dracothian real? Our oldest stories tell us that Sigmar was saved from the endless void by Dracothian, the great drake, and together they tamed the realms. Their eternal friendship is the stuff of legends. So, where is Dracothian? The star drakes and dracoths ridden by the God King's Stormcast are said to be the God Beast's children, but they have an absent father. With chaos and death ascendant, surely Dracothian is needed more than ever. Questions must be answered. So it mentions star drakes and dracoths as well. And I think in Kragnos we're going to learn the kind of answers to those questions, because we've got here one of the special rules, one of the special abilities of Kragnos, Destroyer of the Draconith Empire. Kragnos hunted down dragonkind across all the ancient realms and carries an abiding hatred of their kin to this day. So what you can do is you can re-roll charge rolls and hit rolls for this model while it is within 12 inches of any enemy that has the Star Drake, Drake, Dracoth or Dracoline kind of keyword. So it definitely goes to show that Kragnos might have something to do with Sigmar and Dracothian in the book. Our kind of text for Kragnos says that he's a roaring, trampling god of earthquakes and wanton destruction. Kragnos is known as the end of empires, and in his gnarled hands the dread mace can shatter the walls of cities, even as the shield Tuskbreaker keeps him all but inviolate. I wonder what walls he might be shattering of cities coming up. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. He's got 18 wounds, which is absolutely massive, a 2-up save and bravery of 10. His dread mace has 6 attacks. We've got a rend of -3 and 4 damage. Tuskbreaker -2 rend and hooves of wreck and ruin. Quite a few of these things, such as the movement, the hooves of wreck and ruin, and the bellow of rage, are kind of dependent upon the wounds suffered. But we will we'll talk about that a little bit further down as we carry on. So one of the rules that he has, one of the abilities, is Bellow of Rage. So when wounded, Kragnos bellows at the top of his lungs, sound waves bursting the eardrums of those nearby and rocking buildings to their foundations. So at the end of any phase, if any wounds were allocated to the model in the phase and not negated, we get to roll a dice for each other unit and each defensible terrain feature within 6 inches of this model. If the roll is equal to or greater than the Bellow of Rage value, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds or the defensible terrain feature is demolished. So obviously as Kragnos suffers more wounds, once we get kind of above half, the chances of the Bellow of Rage being more effective is kind of increased. So if he suffers 0 to 9 wounds, Bellow of Rage will be on a 5+. Once you kind of get onto the kind of 16+ with 2 wounds left, we're doing damage on a 2+. Here we've got Rampaging Destruction. This galloping god pounds through the press of his foes, hooves flattening armoured warriors left and right. And this is impressive, okay? So after this model makes a charge move, you can either roll a dice for each enemy unit that's within 1 inches of the model, or pick one enemy monster within 1 inch of the model and roll 2d6. So if you choose to roll a dice for each enemy unit within 1 inch of the model. On a 2+, the unit suffers d6. But if you've chosen, mortal wounds that is, if you pick the enemy monster, you roll 2d6. On a 7, nothing happens. On any other roll, the monster suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the score of the dice used multiplied together. So for example, if you roll 2d6 and get 2 and a 6, you're doing 12 mortal wounds, which is just crazy. So this is where I'm thinking that Kragnos is not going to be cheap to include in your army. His Icon of Destruction gives a buff to all destruction units that are wholly within 12 inches. We get to add 1 to the bravery. And then we've got the Shield Inviolate. Tuskbreaker makes Kragnos impervious to even the most potent magical hexes and bolts. So for this, what we get to do, every time he's affected by a spell or an endless spell ability, we roll 3d6. If the roll is greater than the casting value of the spell or endless spell, we ignore the effects of the spell or endless spell ability on this model. So for example, if the casting value is 7+, and your opponent rolls 10 on the dice, you get to roll 3 dice. So long as you roll more than 7+, which was the casting value, you negate entirely the effects of that spell or endless spell. So Kragnos is going to be incredibly difficult to not only pin down with his generous movement, but also actually harm. And this is kind of where, when we had the initial preview show, that the presenters were talking about this, and they were saying that he can kind of go toe-to-toe with some of the hardest hitters in the Mortal Realms. They kind of even name-checked Archaon. So this makes me think, he's going to be very expensive to include in an army. But I'm going to be, I collect Gloomspite Gits. I'm definitely going to be adding him in. But I'd love to get your opinion. I don't know if you're a destruction player, or if you'll be including Kragnos in your army. But I'd love to get your kind of predictions as to how many points you think he's going to be. I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see that. It just goes on to say that we can add Kragnos to a destruction army, even if he doesn't have the army's keyword on the Warscroll. He cannot use or benefit allegiance abilities, and you cannot include any mercenary units in your army. So, thank you very much for joining me. I've really enjoyed talking to you today about Kragnos, a little about his lore, a little about the rules, and talking about the model too, and thinking about what he might cost to include in your army. As I've said, I'd love to get your opinion on whether you will be doing so, how many points you'll think he'll be, and your impression of the lore too. Do you think it could herald something for the future of the mortal realms? Thank you for joining me. Really looking forward to speaking with you in the comments below, and I'm sure we'll speak soon. Goodbye.